Continuing on with Chapter 15 Sticky Notes, starting on page 403. Know all the positive and negative impacts of dams and reservoirs. So down here is a picture of a dam. So we dam a river and we make a lake behind it. And these lakes are reservoirs of water. So one of the reasons why we do dams is to block this area and fill it up with water so we can have it for drinking water or for agriculture, and so we can save it. So this is a reservoir or a reserve of water. And another thing is in some dams, not all dams, but some dams have hydroelectric turbines in here so we can generate electricity from them. So down here it says generation of renewable energy. Not every dam has this. For instance, Castaic Lake is a reservoir and there's a dam there, but the dam does not have hydroelectricity capacity because it's actually not a river, and so water doesn't actually flow through it. So some of the good parts is that we get a reservoir of water. There's recreational opportunities on the lake like water skiing or fishing, and we can save water for drinking and for irrigation of farms. There's problems though with dams. Behind the dam, sediments build up, and sediments contain nutrients for farms, so if we're preventing these sediments from getting downstream to farm, then that's a problem. Also, notice the giant boy that is not proportional to the dam, so it looks like a giant here. Anyway, he lost his opportunity to go river rafting. So when you block a river, you eliminate it from river rafting. So we have lost recreational activities as well. One of the other things is that species of salmon and trout that travel up the rivers to spawn get blocked. We can sort of help that with something called a fish ladder, which is kind of an area around here that the fish can travel. We'll study that more in chapter 21. There is a risk of dams breaking. We actually had a dam break in Santa Clarita. The San Francisco Dam broke up above Saugus up San Francisco Canyon, and it flooded all of Santa Clarita and killed hundreds of people back about 100 years ago. All right, so on page 404, now because of certain problems, we have removed several dams, and that's if we have alternates to its electricity generation. So when we remove a dam, we restore riparian, so that means river habitat. We allow river recreation, and it allows for more salmon spawning. So in some locations, they are actually removing some of the dams because these benefits outweigh the benefits of having the dam. Page 405, at the bottom, we talk about desalination plants. So a lot of people say, especially during our drought, well, why can't we do desalination? So this is where we take ocean water or brackish water in an estuary. So brackish water is half salty, half fresh. But when we take salt water and we turn it into fresh, it actually uses an enormous amount of electricity, either to heat the water so we can boil it and condense it, or to push it through filters. And the cheapest amount of energy is with fossil fuels. We have solar, wind, etc., but we don't have enough of that to create desalinized water. So there's several processes. Distillation is boiling and condensing, pushing it through a filter, or something called reverse osmosis. One of the problems with desalination plants is it produces brine, which is salty waste. So we take out the salt, and then what do we do with the salt? A lot of times they pump it deep underground, which can cause other problems. It can kill aquatic life, so we pump water in from the ocean. We are pumping in aquatic life, fishes, plankton, things like that. Desalination plants are actually very common in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia has a lot. Israel has a lot now. They are very expensive to run. So if we use desalination plants in Southern California, if we decide to build more of them, our price for water is going to increase dramatically. Page 406. So on the AP test, you will be asked about solutions. So some of the solutions to lowering our water use are rainwater harvesting. So that's where you capture the water from rain. We don't do a very good job with that in Southern California. Most of it goes down storm drains to the ocean and we lose it. We can also recycle gray water. So gray water in your house is the wastewater from things like sinks, not toilets. So toilets is considered brown water and we don't want to recycle that. But there's a lot of other drains in our house, like your washing machine or your dishwasher. We can take that water, filter out the soap, and actually use it on landscaping. So people can build houses that way, where they have two sewer pipes, one with gray water, one with brown water that goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and then the gray water is recycled for their own landscaping. Xeriscaping is drought-resistant plants, and so in California that's native plants. We can also use reclaimed water, so we clean the water in wastewater treatment plants and then we reuse it. We do this in Santa Clarita in our golf courses, so Westridge Golf Courses uses reclaimed water. In Orange County, they take that reclaimed water, they pump it back underground, and then they let it sit there for a few months or a year or so. Then they pump it back up, clean it again, and it's used again in homes and businesses. The space station has to do this because where are they going to get new water from? Israel does this a lot. So reclaimed water that is cleaned is actually probably the purest, safest water around. It sounds gross, but it's usually because we treat it so well that it's usually the safest, cleanest water around. It's what nature does anyway. Nature takes all wastewater and cleans it anyway through the water cycle. Page 408. So let's talk about water pollution. So water pollution can come from all kinds of sources. First, let's look on page 409. These are point source and non-point source. So the difference, this is the first time we've learned about this term. Non-point source means it's a bunch of different little things contributing to the pollution in the water. Point sources means you can actually point to it, and it's a large source that we know, okay, there's a big old feedlot here, and when it rains, all that cow poop is washing into the river with all of its E. coli bacteria or its nitrates and phosphates. We can point to it and go, it's that. Or factories or a sewage, which is a wastewater treatment plant, or an oil spill. Those are all point sources. But when you have a whole bunch of little houses that all spray pesticides for ants or fertilizers on their lawns, and it all mixes together and the rain washes it out to the river here or the ocean, then we call it non-point source because it's a bunch of little things that can contaminate the water. So when we have water pollution, we can clean it up, but it's kind of a reverse thing. So the cost of cleaning the water increases as the pollutant decreases because it's harder to find and capture. So when you have a whole bunch of it in the water, it's actually easier to get. Like think of an oil spill. When it's all clumped together, the oil spill, you can go in and you can clean it a lot easier. But then the remaining oil that's left, so they clean up most of it and the remaining is spread out, and so it's much more expensive to go and clean up that when it's more spread out. On page 409, review eutrophication. So we did a big sticky note flow chart on page 109. Review that. Also note that asphyxiation means suffocation. So at the end of eutrophication, when things die from a hypoxia, which means no oxygen, that the animals asphyxiate. You also need to know that in eutrophication, in fresh water, it's usually phosphorus that causes eutrophication, and in oceans, it's usually nitrates that cause eutrophication. Usually, not always, typically. Go ahead and turn to page 412. On page 412, we have two types of water bodies. So when oligotrophic is actually the opposite of eutrophic. So oligotrophic, it is those nice crystal clear waters. The problem with oligotrophic is that it has very little nutrients, and so you have very little producers because you have very little nutrients. So it's the opposite. You want a body of water to be somewhere in between. You don't want it to be eutrophic, but also you want marine life to be there as well. And oligotrophic has very little marine life because it has very little nutrients. Down here at the bottom of the page, know the causes and effects of biodegradable waste. So things like yard clippings or anything that is organic or living that gets into the water. Sediments we've already talked about, and we'll talk about it again. And then thermal pollution comes from industry and power plant. It lowers your DO, which is dissolved oxygen. So make sure, if you don't know what DO means, write it out, dissolved oxygen. So industry uses water to cool its machines, and then power plants uses water also in the process. When they discharge that hot water, it causes problems. So let's put that on the next page, or on the same page up here. So first let's talk about sediments. So sediments in water are suspended particles. They increase what's something called the turbidity. We'll do water testing, and this is one of the water tests, turbidity. Sediments reduce light infiltration, which means producers don't have as much light for photosynthesis. The lack of light can harm your visual predators, so ones that use their sight to capture prey. If an animal uses other senses, it's not going to affect them that much. Sediments can settle in the water and disrupt your benthic. Benthic means bottom habitats. So if you don't know what benthic means, write that down. It means bottom. Sediments come from construction, from soil that's being washed down into a river or a stream or the ocean. It can come from dams aren't allowing sediments, but that would be like kind of an opposite thing, so ignore that for right now. These are sediments we don't want to be here. Sediments can come from clear cutting in a forest, and then you have soil erosion that ends up in waterways. Thermal pollution, again, comes from using water in power plants or to heat and cool machines. And in thermal pollution, the heat is released into water. The problems is that some species need specific temperatures in their range of tolerance. And if it's too hot, they're going to leave. Also, hotter water holds less dissolved oxygen. That's a property of water that you need to know. So with less dissolved oxygen, you're going to have less life, because life in the water needs dissolved oxygen, most life. Okay, the next thing you have to know, this is an add-on to your book, and we're going to do kind of a virtual lab with this. Biological oxygen demand is the amount of oxygen needed to break down organic matter like sewage or dead things. This kind of goes along here with biodegradable waste. So anytime you have plants or dead animals or whatever that wash into rivers and streams, they have to be decomposed. It also is sewage, so human sewage has to be decomposed. And so it's going to demand a lot of oxygen. So the amount of oxygen needed by our decomposers is called BOD, biological oxygen demand. This is something that is usually on your AP test, and we'll go over a little more with the virtual lab. We'll continue with the next video.